Brutal punch from Lewis Hamilton to Lando Norris after the Miami Grand Prix. Stay until the end to see Lando's unexpected reaction. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The 2025 Miami Grand Prix had already promised spectacle. Palm trees swaying over the shimmering asphalt, grandstands pulsing with the rhythm of the music that had turned the paddock into a festival, and an electric tension between the top teams fighting for supremacy in the most unpredictable season Formula One had seen in years. But as the sun dipped beneath the horizon and the track glowed under the brilliant artificial lights, the spectacle wasn't over. In fact, it hadn't even begun. What unfolded after the checkered flag was nothing short of seismic, a moment of raw emotion and unfiltered confrontation that will be dissected, debated, and remembered for years to come. A dramatic post-race explosion that no one saw coming, least of all involving Lewis Hamilton, the veteran whose legacy seemed immune to chaos. In the waning laps of a race that had already delivered on every promise of excitement, Lando Norris was hunting. The McLaren driver, buoyed by a perfectly timed strategy and running on a set of soft tires just 6 laps old, had transformed into a rocket ship on wheels. He had been flying past cars with clinical precision, every overtake clean, measured, and lethal. His target now? Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion who had, up until that moment, been defending P2 with a kind of masterful control that only years at the pinnacle of the sport could teach. But this wasn't just another overtake. This was personal. This was symbolic. Norris, once seen as the cheerful underdog with talent to spare, was no longer the apprentice. And in this exact moment, he was determined to prove that the torch had already been passed, whether Hamilton liked it or not. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Hamilton's W16 Mercedes was beginning to feel the heat, literally and figuratively. His medium compound tires, fitted during a safety car 10 laps prior, were now screaming for mercy. The degradation was visible in his lap times, his rear tires slipping just a bit too much on exit, and his sector split starting to turn orange and yellow instead of the green that had kept him ahead. His team had warned him, Lando's coming. He's got pace. Be smart. And Hamilton was smart. He tightened every defensive line, positioned his car perfectly, cut off every possible angle, until they reached turn 11. What happened at turn 11 will be played in slow motion for the rest of the season. Norris, with DRS wide open and confidence oozing from every movement of his McLaren, made a move that was either sheer brilliance or reckless ambition, depending on whom you asked. He went for the inside. Not because the gap was there, but because he was determined to make it exist. In that microsecond decision, two worlds collided. Hamilton, perhaps sensing the lunge too late, turned in just as Norris committed. Contact. Subtle but decisive. The rear right of Norris's car clipped the front wing of Hamilton's Mercedes, not enough to send carbon fiber flying, but just enough to disrupt the fragile balance of Hamilton's chassis. The car jerked out wide, not off track, but wide enough to lose the racing line. In that instant, in those two heartbeats, Hamilton's entire afternoon began to unravel. By the time he rejoined the ideal line, Norris was already past. But it didn't stop there. Charles Leclerc, who had been shadowing the duel from just behind in P4, pounced immediately. He dived into turn 12 with a surgical strike that left no room for response. Oscar Piastri followed a heartbeat later, cutting into turn 13 with impeccable precision. And as if the wound needed more salt, Sergio Perez, who had been nowhere near podium contention earlier in the race, surged past with the aid of the slipstream. Just like that, in less than 20 seconds, Lewis Hamilton had fallen from second place to sixth. The radio crackled with silence. No words. Just static and the stunned exhalation of breath from a man who had just seen his podium hopes vanish. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. But the real drama hadn't even started. As the cars crossed the finish line and fans erupted for Max Verstappen's unchallenged victory, the paddock's attention turned elsewhere. Hamilton's body language was unmissable. He climbed out of the car with a cold fury in his eyes, not the theatrical kind, but the tightly coiled anger of a man who had just been robbed of something he believed was his. He didn't throw his gloves. He didn't shout. He walked. Direct. Focused. Straight into the McLaren garage. Cameras scrambled. Reporters surged. The world collectively held its breath. Norris was still unbuckling his Hans device when Hamilton appeared, stepping into the cramped debrief area uninvited. ignoring the surprised looks of McLaren engineers and PR staff. What happened next was part confrontation, part confession, and part collapse of long-simmering tensions between two generations of British racing royalty. "You call that a move?" Hamilton's voice was low but intense, his words slicing through the room like glass. "You think you can just dive bomb into turn 11 like it's a karting session?" Norris didn't flinch. "I saw a gap. I went for it." "Isn't that what you've always said, Lewis? If you no longer go for a gap." "Don't quote Senna to me," Hamilton snapped. "You knew it wasn't clean. You touched me. You knew what would happen." The silence that followed was heavier than any crowd noise. Engineers exchanged glances. Cameras continued rolling, discreetly but undeniably present. Then Norris leaned forward. "You're not the only one who can race hard, Lewis. You've had your era. Maybe it's time to let the next one begin." Those words, spoken with a calm that belied the fire underneath, detonated everything. Hamilton didn't reply. He stared at Norris for a long moment, turned and walked out, but not before pausing at the doorway to throw one final shot over his shoulder. "Next time, I won't back off." The internet erupted. Social media platforms were flooded with replays, slow-motion breakdowns, fan theories, onboard analysis, and emotional tributes. Hashtags like hashtag Hamilton vs. Norris, hashtag Miami Meltdown, and hashtag F1 Civil War trended for hours. Former drivers chimed in. Jenson Button called the move borderline but fair. Nico Rosberg, ever eager to needle his old rival, sided with Norris. Even Sebastian Vettel, watching from his vineyard in Austria, posted a cryptic tweet: "New blood. Same fire." The FIA launched an immediate investigation, though no penalties were issued. Race director Mikkel Jensen called it a hard but racing incident, but added that post-race behavior would be reviewed. And yet, beyond all the analysis and digital chaos, one truth had become crystal clear: something had shifted. Not just in the standings, not just on the track, but in the very balance of power in Formula One. For years, Hamilton had been the immovable object. But in Miami, for just a fleeting moment, he met an unstoppable force. And that force had a bright papaya orange helmet and a glint of defiance in his eyes. As the lights of Miami faded and the circus packed up for the next destination, everyone was left asking the same question. Not about who won or who got fastest lap, but about something far more primal. What happens next, when titans clash and neither is willing to back down? Because one thing is now certain: the war isn't over. The checkered flag waved under the setting sun, marking the end of what many assumed would be just another race weekend dominated by Max Verstappen. As expected, the Red Bull superstar crossed the finish line with clinical precision, extending his seemingly unstoppable reign at the top. Behind him, the crowd erupted as Lando Norris powered his McLaren over the line in second place, an achievement celebrated like a victory by the papaya-clad crew in the garage and by fans around the world. Charles Leclerc, driving with his signature mix of elegance and aggression, rounded out the podium for Ferrari, salvaging some pride for the Scuderia on a day that began with questions and ended with redemption. But just as the world settled into the expected post-race rituals, champagne sprays, cool-down rooms, and media interviews, something far more explosive was unfolding behind the scenes. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. As drivers peeled off their gloves and helmets, heading back to their respective team areas, sharp-eyed viewers noticed something odd on the broadcast feed. Lewis Hamilton, the seven-time world champion, wasn't following the usual path toward the Mercedes garage. He wasn't giving interviews. He wasn't taking a moment to debrief with his engineers. Instead, with his helmet still gripped tightly in his left hand and his jaw clenched in a way that betrayed more than just post-race fatigue, Hamilton marched with chilling purpose down the paddock lane, directly toward the McLaren garage. The camera crews caught on quickly. Like sharks to blood, they followed. The tension was instantly palpable. No words were spoken at first, not that microphones would have picked them up over the din of the paddock chaos. But the body language said everything. Hamilton didn't slow down. He didn't hesitate. And when he arrived at the entrance to McLaren's hospitality zone, he didn't ask to speak to Lando Norris. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight in, shoulders squared like a soldier heading to war. And that's when it happened. The moment Norris saw Hamilton approaching, his own posture stiffened. The young Brit, still flushed with adrenaline from his podium finish, didn't smile. He didn't nod. Instead, he stepped forward too, meeting Hamilton head-on, like he'd been expecting this confrontation. The two drivers were inches apart when the shouting started. Though no microphones picked up the beginning, multiple eyewitnesses, including mechanics, PR staff, and several stunned journalists, later confirmed what they heard. Hamilton, voice raised and eyes blazing, accused Norris of driving like a spoiled child with no respect. He said the McLaren driver had pulled a ridiculous move that could have taken them both out. He called him reckless, arrogant, and a joke. Norris, clearly caught off guard but unwilling to back down, fired right back. "You left the door wide open," he snapped. "If you can't defend, don't blame me for going for it." According to one source, he even added, "You think this is still 2015, don't you? That you own this track? Well, you don't." What should have remained a verbal clash between two fierce competitors rapidly began to spiral. In a moment that seemed to suspend time itself, Hamilton took a single step forward, closing the final gap between them, and before anyone could react, he threw a punch. Not a push. Not a grab. A clean, instinctive right hook that connected squarely with the left side of Norris's jaw. Gasps erupted around them. The sound of the impact, dull but unmistakable, seemed to echo off the walls of the McLaren garage. Norris stumbled backward, one hand instinctively reaching for his face, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief. For a moment, he didn't move. He didn't retaliate. Maybe he was too stunned. Maybe he knew that if he responded, even with a shove, it would ignite a media firestorm the likes of which Formula One hadn't seen in decades. Or maybe, just maybe, Lando understood something in that instant. That Lewis wasn't just angry, he was hurt, frustrated, feeling the weight of a season slipping through his fingers. But even with Norris standing down, the chaos escalated fast. Members of both teams rushed in, some trying to break up the confrontation, others just frozen in disbelief. The paddock, which had moments ago been buzzing with the usual post-race energy, suddenly felt like a pressure cooker about to blow its lid. And then, from the edge of the scene, came an unexpected savior. Charles Leclerc, still in his race suit, his hair damp from the podium celebration, moved with astonishing speed. Like a man possessed by duty, or perhaps simply a desperate need to de-escalate, he stepped between the two drivers. His arms extended, his voice loud and clear. "Enough," he shouted. "Both of you. Enough. You're not thinking, you're just angry. This isn't who we are. You're champions. You're role models. Think about what this looks like." It worked. Hamilton, chest still heaving, took a half step back. Norris lowered his hand from his jaw, his expression unreadable. Silence fell, tense and heavy. Team principals began to arrive. Cameras were ordered away. Security stepped in. And still, the paddock stood frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. In the hours that followed, rumors spread like wildfire, on social media, in press rooms, and in whispers across the motorhomes. Some said Norris had provoked him. Others swore Hamilton had been unraveling for weeks. The FIA released a statement before the night was over, confirming an investigation. Both teams refused to comment. But the images, the confrontation, the punch, Leclerc's intervention, were already viral. It had started as a routine race weekend. It ended as the moment that would change Formula One forever. Security personnel were immediately dispatched as tensions erupted in the pit lane. Within seconds, the scene spiraled into chaos. Voices were raised. A scuffle broke out. Fans in the grandstands had their phones out, capturing what they could through the barriers and fences. The footage spread like wildfire online, but on the ground, there was no mistaking the severity of what had just occurred. Lewis Hamilton, visibly enraged, was quickly escorted away by members of the Mercedes team. His face was taut with emotion, the kind of expression rarely seen from the seven-time world champion. His breathing was labored, his jaw locked, and his fists still clenched as if holding on to the raw adrenaline of the moment. No words were spoken. The air was thick with tension. McLaren engineers formed a protective circle around Lando Norris, whose face was flushed, not from injury, but from the shock of what had just taken place. He waved off a team medic, offering a tight-lipped nod to signal he was physically unharmed, though the psychological impact was written all over him. His ego had taken a hit, and the emotional bruise was arguably more painful than any physical blow. Within minutes, the FIA was informed. The paddock, usually buzzing with post-race analysis and media chatter, went completely still. A silence spread as the governing body moved fast, convening an emergency disciplinary meeting that included race stewards, legal advisors, and even representatives from Liberty Media. It was clear this wasn't just a post-race incident. This was a full-blown crisis. The FIA began combing through every possible angle: security footage, trackside cameras, even bystander videos uploaded to social media platforms. Eyewitness testimonies were taken: team members, marshals, even rival engineers. What emerged was a disturbing but indisputable sequence of events that showed Hamilton, clearly provoked by something, confronting Norris with uncharacteristic aggression. The heated exchange escalated quickly, culminating in physical contact that stunned everyone present. Less than 60 minutes later, the motorsport world received the shock of the season. The FIA released an official ruling: Lewis Hamilton would be fined $1 million, a historic figure and one of the largest non-sporting penalties ever issued in Formula One. The statement was blunt and uncompromising. Formula One is a sport of immense passion and pressure, but physical violence, regardless of circumstance or provocation, will never be tolerated. Any further escalation of such behavior will be met with harsher sanctions, including potential suspension or exclusion. The backlash was immediate and divisive. Social media exploded. Fans took sides. Some defended Hamilton, citing years of pressure, relentless scrutiny, and the emotional toll of a controversial season. Others demanded harsher punishment, arguing that the integrity of the sport demanded zero tolerance. Debates raged across forums, live streams, and podcasts. Mercedes issued their own statement just 15 minutes later. In a tone that was both measured and sobering, the team acknowledged the gravity of the situation. Lewis has accepted full responsibility for his actions. He has apologized to Lando Norris, to the FIA, to the fans, and to the entire Mercedes-AMG Petronas team. He will pay the fine personally. As a team, we understand that emotions in this sport can reach a boiling point, but professionalism must always prevail. That same evening, amid unprecedented media pressure and the glare of millions of eyes worldwide, both Hamilton and Norris stepped up for a joint press conference. It was standing room only. Journalists scrambled for space. Cameras clicked. Microphones were extended forward. Every word was broadcast live. What happened next took everyone by surprise. There was no defensiveness. No rehearsed PR statements. Just raw, human emotion. Hamilton was the first to speak. His voice was quiet, yet steady. His eyes didn't meet the cameras at first, as he exhaled and said, "There's no excuse for what happened today. I lost control. The contact on track left me frustrated, but what I did afterwards was wrong. I crossed a line I never should have approached. I let down my team, my fans, and myself. I regret it deeply." He paused, visibly holding back emotion. Then he looked up. Lando drove a strong race. "We had our differences today, but that never justifies what I did. To the fans, I'm sorry. You expect more from us. You deserve better." Norris followed. Despite being younger and the victim in the altercation, he handled the moment with incredible maturity. "I didn't expect what happened either. In the heat of the moment, things were said and done that were out of character. But I also understand this sport. The pressure, the expectations, they can break you down. We've spoken privately. We've cleared the air. I respect Lewis, and I always have. What happened today doesn't change that." The atmosphere in the room shifted. From tension and judgment to respect and introspection. It wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It became a moment of humanity, two rivals facing the consequences of a deeply personal and public mistake. Back in the paddock, other drivers began commenting. Charles Leclerc called it a sad reminder that even the best among us are human. Fernando Alonso, known for his fiery competitiveness, simply said, "We all snap. The difference is what you do afterwards." And while the FIA's penalty stood firm, the narrative began to evolve. The focus shifted from scandal to accountability. From anger to reflection. In the days that followed, Hamilton's actions were analyzed endlessly, from sports psychologists to former champions. Was this the beginning of the end for the veteran driver, or a turning point that would reshape his legacy? Could Norris bounce back mentally and turn this chapter into a new source of motivation? And what did this all mean for the sport itself, especially as it pushes deeper into a new era of global scrutiny and massive audience engagement? Sponsors remained silent for now, but the spotlight was brighter than ever. Every race from this point forward would carry new weight, new eyes, and new expectations. And so, a weekend that began with tire strategies, weather forecasts, and championship calculations ended with a single unforgettable headline that no one had predicted. A confrontation that shook Formula One to its core, and reminded the world that behind the helmets and racing suits, these drivers are human after all. In the hours that followed the checkered flag, the Miami paddock gradually slid back into its familiar post-race rhythm, but the air was anything but typical. Mechanics returned to their tools with robotic focus, drivers disappeared into briefing rooms to dissect telemetry, and media crews lined up for interviews. The intense Florida heat was slowly fading, replaced by the warm glow of floodlights and murmurs of disbelief still echoing through the garages. Conversations that would normally revolve around tire degradation, strategy calls, and DRS zones were now dominated by one singular sensational moment: the unexpected, almost surreal confrontation between two of the grid's most charismatic figures, Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris. It wasn't just a scuffle. It was a flashpoint. A symbol. An eruption of everything that Formula One often tries to keep beneath the surface: the ego, the pride, the pressure, the weight of expectation, and above all, the unfiltered human emotion that no telemetry data can quantify. On social media, hashtags exploded. TikTok clips went viral. Twitter spaces filled with heated debates. Instagram flooded with slow-motion replays, armchair psychoanalysis, and side-by-side breakdowns of every expression, every movement. The internet lit up like the Miami skyline. In press rooms across the circuit, journalists scrambled to rewrite their headlines. What had started as a tactical chess match on track had turned into a psychological war off it. Some headlines framed Hamilton's reaction as a meltdown, a moment of weakness unbecoming of a seven-time world champion. Others painted it as a courageous display of raw authenticity, the kind of visceral honesty fans rarely get to see in a sport dominated by PR-trained soundbites and sponsor-safe interviews. Behind closed doors, sponsors whispered nervously about brand image, while team principals tried to cool tempers before the firestorm grew any larger. But what was truly astonishing wasn't just the explosion itself, it was what came after. That night, under the soft lighting of a private rooftop gathering organized by Formula One management, the narrative took an unexpected turn. The tension that had once been thick enough to cut with a knife began to dissolve, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The event was intended to be a quiet thank you to top-tier sponsors and key stakeholders, a moment of relaxation after a brutal race weekend. Yet it became something more, a stage for redemption. Hamilton arrived first, dressed not in fireproof gear but in a charcoal gray suit that shimmered subtly beneath the lights. His demeanor was composed, but his eyes betrayed the remnants of the storm. Minutes later, Norris stepped in, more casual, a glass already in hand, his signature grin slightly tighter than usual. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Then, to the surprise of many watching from the fringes, Hamilton approached him, not with guarded body language, not with rehearsed diplomacy, but with something sincere. They spoke. Not formally, but like two men who just survived the same fire. Witnesses described a quiet intensity to their conversation, as if both drivers were peeling away the armor of competition just long enough to see one another as more than rivals. And then came the laugh, brief, unexpected but real. Hamilton cracked a smile. Norris raised his glass. An unspoken truce was made, not brokered by managers or PR reps, but by the racers themselves. Nearby, Charles Leclerc observed with amused relief. Sensing the moment, he stepped in and placed an arm around both men, joking that he should be awarded a trophy for best mediator in the paddock. That photo, the three of them smiling, toasting, letting go, would soon be shared across every major platform. And in that image, something shifted. It wasn't about the punch anymore. It was about what came after. Yes, fans will remember the explosion, the emotion, the raised voices and the look in Hamilton's eyes, somewhere between betrayal and heartbreak. But they'll also remember the redemption, the handshake, the humanity, the fact that beneath the layers of carbon fiber, corporate obligations, and world-class engineering, Formula One drivers are, at their core, deeply human. They bleed. They burn. They make mistakes. And sometimes, they make amends. The Miami Grand Prix was supposed to be another race under the lights, another notch in the calendar. Instead, it became a mirror. It reflected not just the speed, the strategy, or the show, but the soul of the sport itself. This wasn't just about racing lines and pit stop strategy. It was about pride, redemption, and the lessons that come only when everything boils over. And as the teams packed up their equipment, loading containers bound for the next destination, something lingered in the air. A sense that this weekend had changed something. Not just for Hamilton. Not just for Norris. But for everyone watching, whether from the grandstands or their living rooms. This wasn't just a race. It was a reckoning. Formula One, at its core, is not just about who crosses the line first. It's about who we become in the pursuit of that finish line. And on that humid Miami night, the world saw two drivers lose themselves in the fire, and somehow come out the other side, not unscathed, but perhaps wiser, more grounded, and just a little more understood.